Good evening for those joining. We're going to take a few minutes to let the participants and the attendees come into the meeting. So give us a couple of minutes and we will get started. Thanks for being here. Hi there, we're just letting the number of people that have registered come on to the webinar. And so if you give us a minute or two, we will get started, but we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to join us before we begin. Thank you. Okay, it is about 3 after the hour, and we've had a number of people join us, and we know that your time is valuable, so we don't want to hold up getting started for too long. But again, I just wanted to say good evening. My name is Mary Catherine Gibbs. I am a land use attorney here in Alexandria, and I want to welcome you all to what is the 4th community engagement event that HRP has organized to discuss the redevelopment of the Potomac River Generating Station in Old Town North. But before we begin, there are a few items that we want to review to ensure that everybody is comfortable using Zoom. Audience members, please note that you are muted both on audio and camera. We do this to ensure that we're able to efficiently review the materials and answer all of your questions. If you're interested in asking questions or making comments, we ask that you submit those through the Q&A function that you should be seeing at the bottom of your screen. You can click on the icon where you'll be then prompted to type and submit your questions. We also do this so that all of the questions are logged in on our end. We'll be gathering these questions received during the meeting, and we'll answer as many as we can during the question and answer session of the meeting after our presentation. Any questions we're unable to cover in the time that's allotted for tonight's meeting will be saved so that we can provide written answers to them all and post them on our website within a couple of weeks. We're also recording this meeting, and we will be posting a recording of the meeting on our website as well. To reiterate, the question and answer function is the only way we're able to engage here tonight. The chat box function and the raise your hands function will not work. For those who are joining us by phone, and I think I saw there were a couple on our attendee list, you can send your questions to hrpinfo@hilcoglobal.com, and we'll do our best to check the email during the meeting, but at a minimum, we'll have those answered when we share the others to our website. We'll also have the entire presentation translated into Spanish and include that on our website. If there's a need for any member of the public for translation to ask a question tonight, we have a panelist available to translate the question and the answer. And if you need that Spanish translation, please ask before your question so that we can answer it accordingly. Finally, thank you all for joining us here tonight, and we'll go ahead and get started. Let's move on to the agenda. Again, my name is Mary Catherine Gibbs. I'm the Land Use Counsel for HRP on this exciting project. Welcome. As I said, this is the 4th community engagement event that HRP has organized about this important project. We want to assure everyone that there will be plenty of opportunity tonight and at additional community meetings to participate and engage in this process. HRP is committed to working together with the community and the city throughout this process, and we thank you for being here tonight. We wanted to let you know what we're going to be covering this evening. We're going to go through a welcome and overview. Then we're also going to talk about the timeline and where we've been, what we've done in the project background. Then the city will talk about Old Town North Small Area Plan and their design principles. Then we'll do a presentation of the actual CDD submission that we want to talk to you about tonight. And we're going to get to a significant amount of community questions. That's going to be a large portion of our discussion. And then we'll talk to you about next steps and how to stay involved. I thought it was important to note who all the stakeholders are in this process, because each one is important. And it starts with you, the residents of Alexandria, and most importantly, our Old Town North neighbors, including the community groups in the area and the members of the relevant boards and commissions in the area. HRP and the City of Alexandria are obviously involved as the property owner and the government entity responsible for reviewing the project. But as important as those stakeholders around us, like the National Park Service, Pepco, and the FAA, which controls how high development can go this close to National Airport. Finally, to ensure a vibrant mixed-use development, the Alexandria Economic Development Partnership is also engaged in this process. And now I'd like to turn it over to Melissa Schrock of HRP to introduce her team and HRP itself.
Thanks, Mary Catherine. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Melissa Schrock, and I lead the mixed-use development team here at HRP. We had the opportunity to meet many members of the community during our site tours in June, and we're excited to share with you tonight our initial Coordinated Development District Plan, or CDD Concept 1 plan, and to hear your feedback and answer any questions. Before we dive into the plan, just a brief overview about HRP and who we are. As many of you may know, we specialize in acquiring, remediating, and transforming former industrial sites into thriving new developments. PRGS will actually be the 5th coal-fired power plant HRP has remediated and transformed. We've also tackled other kinds of complicated sites, like the former Bethlehem Steel Mill, now called Trade Point Atlantic, at Sparrows Point on 3,100 acres outside of Baltimore. And we're actively decommissioning and demolishing a 1,300-acre oil refinery inside the city limits of Philadelphia. Part of what makes us unique in the commercial real estate industry is our expertise with these kinds of former industrial sites. Today, we are about 80 professionals nationwide, and here you see the team members working on the PRGS project, many of whom you will meet here tonight. Some people think it's a little odd that I title this slide Why We Do, but for anyone out there who has read Simon Sinek's Start With Why, you'll understand. These are the foundational principles that motivate us at HRP. We choose to tackle the types of sites other developers would steer clear of because we fundamentally believe that these sites represent a unique and transformative opportunity to practice sustainability on multiple fronts. First, they give us the opportunity to dramatically improve the environment through remediation of on-site environmental conditions and creation of forward-thinking real estate. Second, they help us contribute to sustainable economies by taking obsolete properties and putting them back into productive use. And finally, they enable us to connect with and to support local communities in a variety of ways. What we do, in other words, what we build on each of the sites that we acquire, really depends on its location and local market conditions. Sometimes our sites are appropriately located, as was the case for Sparrows Point, to become global logistics hubs, or facilities dedicated to e-commerce and distribution. Other times, like here in Alexandria, these sites will be transformed into vibrant mixed-use communities with a mix of residential, commercial, and retail space. And finally, in certain markets where the life science industry is strong, we build research and development or therapeutic manufacturing facilities. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Farner from the city. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Mary Catherine.
That's okay. I wanted to go through for you, as I said earlier, I want to go through the timeline that we've had for this project and what the background is for the project. As I said earlier, this is our fourth event to engage with the community. You can see the first 4 circles, the 3 meetings that we've had in the past. As you might recall, we met in February to introduce you to HRP and their experience with sites like this all over the country. And then we met in April to review all the work done to get to the Old Town North Small Area Plan, and we reviewed the overall planning guidelines in the plan. Then in June, we opened up the site for 2 full days of guided tours so you could finally walk around what's been closed off for so long. This all culminated in HRP making its first submission to the city as part of this process called the Concept 1 submission of the CDD concept plan, which the city will describe further shortly. We can go to the next slide. These are pictures of the site tours where you got to experience some of the unique characteristics of the site and the tremendous opportunities this site presents for a transformational project here. And we thought that was a really very much an opportune time in order to engage with you. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to the city, to Jeff Farner, who's going to talk about the Old Town North Small Area Plan, and Catherine Malaras, who's going to continue with the design principles.
Good evening, everyone. For the record, my name is Jeff Farner. I'm Deputy Director with the Planning Department, and I'm also joined with Catherine Miliaris, also of the Planning Department. We also have other departments here to answer questions at the end, from Transportation and Environmental Services, as well as our Parks and Recreation staff. So again, we are very much here to answer questions to the extent they come up at the end of this conversation. And I think we wanted to start with the community process that led to the Old Town North Small Area Plan. Some of you were probably involved in this process. It was a very robust community process, open houses, community tours. We had different charrettes, different processes where we heard from the community pretty clearly what the expectation was when this site was to come in. Goals, objectives, you see some of those in the bottom. What are some of the categories that we heard from the community, given how important this site is for this community and also for the city? And that led to the next slide, which was the creation of a framework. And really, it started with how do we integrate this historically industrial area back into this neighborhood. And one of the things that we started with was open space. Expanding the open space adjacent to the water was very much a conversation that the community had early on. We also had a conversation working with Norfolk Southern to convert the rail corridor into open space that you see on the left-hand side, providing more open space on the site. We also talked about integrating connections, vehicle, ped, and bike connections from the community into this site. Again, this is, we feel, and I think we've heard from the community, a real opportunity to have this be part of the neighborhood and not separated, which it has been historically because it's been a power plant. We also had conversations about the importance of mixed use. We had the conversation about sustainability and how important that is for this site as we think about future redevelopment. Arts uses being very important and incorporating some of the history and heritage of this site and the neighborhood. So very much goals and objectives. And I think the community was pretty clear through this process. And I think one of the things that we felt, and I think HRP felt as well, is going out to the community very early. So one of the things I think you've probably seen is HRP just submitted an application to the city, and Catherine is going to talk about some of the city comments. And what we are hoping to do is work with HRP and the community to address those comments and ultimately bring a proposal to the Planning Commission and City Council. So again, we'll be happy to answer questions and comments at the end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Jeff. Again, I'm Catherine Miliaris, and I'm a principal planner in the Development Division of the Department of Planning and Zoning. And my team works on projects in the east end of the city, and we'll be working very closely on this. So as Jeff has explained the small area process, and that was adopted, what happens next? The next part is what I'm going to be talking about. And we move to the development review and approval process, sometimes referred to as the entitlement process. And this is how the small area plan is actually implemented. As you can see, community engagement is integral to the first two phases as the conceptual plan is developed and then buildings and site plans are designed. Both of these phases include approval through an ongoing public process. The level of detail and information provided also increases as we move through the phases, with high-level conceptual planning occurring at the outset and then moving to more detail through the site plan and finally permitting phases. Each of these phases is an iterative process. The applicant will have multiple submissions and respond to community and city comments with each submission. For this project, we are at the beginning of the CDD concept plan and rezoning phase that you see on the left. This phase includes approval of a rezoning of the property from its current utility zoning to a coordinated development district, which we'll refer to as a CDD, and approval of a conceptual design plan for the district. The conceptual design plan lays out the site and shows the location of blocks, roads, open space, and the like. At this time, the applicant has submitted the first phase in this process, known as a concept one submission. We anticipate multiple submissions that provide increasingly more detail and information as part of the CDD conceptual design plan review. The CDD rezoning will establish the density, permitted land uses, height, and other zoning regulations that will be reviewed as part of future special use permits and development site plans for individual buildings or blocks. Throughout this phase and the subsequent phase, there are multiple opportunities for community input and engagement. Once the CDD rezoning and conceptual design plan are approved by City Council, then the applicant will move on to the next phase, shown here as the site plans phase. And they will then request approval of individual preliminary site plans for development special use permits, what we often refer to as DSUPs, typically for individual blocks or buildings. At the same time, the developer will seek approval of an infrastructure plan that lays out the engineering and technical details for the streets, parks, and other key infrastructure elements. Each DSUP goes through multiple iterations of review as well as community meetings before going to Planning Commission and City Council for approval at a public hearing. Once the buildings and infrastructure plans are approved at a public hearing, the next stage is permitting and construction that you see on the right. The permitting process includes administrative review of the final site plan and building permits. Once construction begins, city staff remains involved monitoring the construction with several inspections throughout the process. Once construction is complete, certificates of occupancy will be issued and the buildings, parks, and roads will be ready for residents and workers alike. Next slide, please. As part of staff's review over the past 2 months of that initial submission that was made in late July, we developed site design principles with the idea being that these principles will result in a site design for the conceptual design plan consistent with the Old Town North Small Area Plan. These are not new principles or deviations from the plan. Here I'll walk through what these key site principles are. They're in no specific order and each is very important to the final or what the plan that will be developed that we would expect to see in a successful design for this site and what we will continue to note as part of the iterative CDD conceptual design plan process. First, the extension of the north-south streets, Fairfax and Royal specifically, into the site consistent with the illustrative concept shown in the Old Town North Small Area Plan. Second, the street layout should respect the topography of the site, the waterfront, and the adjacent National Park Service open space. This should be specifically accomplished by removing any roads from the resource protection area, known as an RPA. RPAs are often called buffers as they are adjacent to environmentally sensitive features like rivers and wetlands, with the buffer measured as 100 feet landward from the feature. The Potomac River has a 100-foot buffer or RPA. While there can be parks and trails within the RPA, staff recommends that no roads or new buildings be located in the RPA. I will note, and you'll hear more about it in the applicant's presentation, that there is currently a pump house located in the RPA. And although we rarely make exceptions for buildings and roads in the RPA, we do support the adaptive reuse of this element to take advantage of this unique element of the power plant site and its location and connection to the river. Third, the proposed land use should include a mix of uses, including commercial, residential, retail, and arts, that will encourage activation day and night and contribute to the vibrancy of innovation uses as envisioned in the small area plan. Next, the streets in the site should connect to the neighborhoods surrounding the site, recognizing the opportunity to provide meaningful multimodal connections to Old Town North and public accessibility for all. Next slide, please. The remaining principles that you see here. First, as noted as a guiding principle in the small area plan and identified as a community priority during that planning process, there should be opportunities to provide on-site affordable housing. The city needs more affordable housing, and it should be included on-site with market rate development. Next, a fundamental principle of the Old Town North Small Area Plan is maintaining, strengthening, and expanding the arts in Old Town North. As part of the redevelopment of this site, providing a location for a strong arts anchor is key to creating an active and vibrant sense of place here through the continuation of the arts corridor along North Fairfax Street into the site. Sustainability strategies that include the establishment of energy use targets, energy master planning, and the incorporation of sustainable design across the street must be integrated into the CDD conceptual design plan and future special use development special use permits. And finally, the project must create high quality open space on the site that provides for different forms of activity and enjoyment, that connects to the well-loved National Park Service and Mount Vernon Trail along the river, as well as to the future Old Town North linear park along the rail tracks. In summary, as the conceptual plan evolves, we expect to see refinements consistent with these principles, in addition to the input from the community and other stakeholders as the project moves forward. I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Now we're going to dive into the plan. Could you go to the next slide, please, Carolyn? So building off of the city's principles, which really address overall development goals, as we start to think about how to approach the physical site planning, which is really the stage that we're in now, we've formulated 3 primary design drivers that we hope synthesize what we've heard from the local community, city staff, and leaders. First, though the site is somewhat eccentrically located and is a bit of an edge condition in the city, meaning it's not right in the center of Old Town North, we want the site to feel well integrated into the surrounding neighborhood and urban fabric. And we do this both through plan elements like direct street connections, but also through creating a friendly, inviting, and walkable mixed-use environment at the sidewalk level. Second, we've heard loud and clear, both from the community and the city, that Alexandrians want to feel better and have better and more usable connections to their waterfront. And so we focused a lot of attention on how to improve both visual and physical connectivity to the Potomac in a way that is slightly different than other parts of Alexandria, but we believe is appropriate for this high bluff site overlooking the river. And lastly, this site has been a void or a barrier in the city for over 70 years. And so as we open it up, we want to add new public open space for the community on our site that is seamlessly connected to both existing parkland, like the National Park Service property to the east, and to future parkland, like the linear park that is envisioned on the Norfolk Southern land to the southwest. Now, to breathe some life into how those three principles might be translated into the built environment, we wanted to share this artist's interpretation, which is highly conceptual. None of these buildings are actually designed yet, as we're still very early in the process. And of course, we haven't developed all the open space features. In fact, we took some liberties, removing some of the trees along the waterfront here in order to get this perspective and provide some visibility. But this rendering gives an idea of the quality of what we envision for the future of PRGS. A mixed-use community reinforcing the arts and cultural district extending from Fairfax Street into the site, providing a variety of open space for different activities and connecting Alexandrians to their waterfront in a meaningful way.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Chang, and I'm Vice President of Mixed Use Development at HRP. The Potomac River Generating Station property at 18.8 acres is the largest contiguous development site in Old Town North. It is a tremendously unique site, not only in terms of its size and location, but also because it shares property lines with multiple agencies and owners. As a result, significant design and permitting coordination is required to achieve the vision that Melissa just presented. The next few slides speak to the significance of interacting with multiple property abutters, most of whom have their own coordination processes. The first and most significant to HRP's vision to seamlessly connect visitors to the waterfront is the National Park Service and their land along the Potomac River that includes the Mount Vernon Trail. The majority of waterfront is National Park Service property, which you can see here in light green. Design and permitting coordination with the agency is critical to unlock and increase waterfront park access for existing and future generations. The site's southern boundary is shared by Norfolk Southern Corporation, which owns a linear parcel, which you can see is dark green. It's contemplated within the Old Town North small area plan to be converted to a rails to trails type park for community use. And to the west is Pepco's substation in purplish gray. It will remain and requires visual screening from the redevelopment. As you can see, looking at the site's boundaries, to achieve the principles of the small area plan and HRP's vision of a community connected to its surroundings, many institutional and government parties will need to come together to achieve a cohesive vision for this unique site. The site's unique location will require thoughtful integration into the Old Town North fabric, which is one of our design drivers, as well as a primary small area plan principle. Coordination with our neighbors to the north and south are critical to achieve this goal. We'll work with the residents of Marina Towers, the high rise to the north, built circa 1970, to increase connectivity to the site and potentially to Mount Vernon Trail and adjacent waterfront. High-rise neighbors along our southern property line include the Muse condominiums, now under construction, and 1199 North Fairfax, one of the Trans-Potomac Plaza office towers built in the early 1980s. Farther to the west, Harbor Terrace condominiums are garden-style residences built towards the end of World War II, and they sit on an elevation that banks up from the site and towards the George Washington Memorial Parkway. As you can see, there's a great amount of variety in terms of use, architectural style, and configuration that influence the integration of the PRGS site into this unique context. Significant challenges exist that were not known when the small area plan was developed, and the extent of impacts were not fully understood by HRP until we acquired the property and began on-site investigation. There are multiple utility and stormwater easements that prohibit development on large portions of the site, with the exception of sidewalks, roads, and open space. So these building constraints include, and I'm going to start from the south and move north. Pepco has a transmission line easement. It runs the length of the southwest property line and is up to 100 feet wide. A storm drainage tunnel cuts through the middle of the property, which you can see in blue lines and arrows. A fiber line easement zigzags along the northern stretch of the property, and a storm drain and stormwater easement sit along the northern property line. Additional building constraints include a 40 to 50 foot wide building restriction line along the eastern property. It's the result of a legal settlement between Pepco and the United States over the ownership of the waterfront, as well as a resource protection area, or RPA, that Catherine had defined earlier in this presentation. It follows the riverfront line inland up to 100 feet with the goal of preserving natural conditions. After factoring in numerous buildable area constraints, notably from easements and environmentally protected restriction lines, the 18.8 acre site is quickly reduced to 11.9 acres of site area available for development. Developable land area is further reduced to approximately 8 acres once roads, sidewalks, and open space are factored in. These constraints have greatly informed the ways HRP can achieve a vision integral to the Old Town North Small Area Plan and in context with its unique surroundings.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Carolyn Sponza from Gensler. Michelle reviewed the unique and opportunities and challenges of the PRGS site. And now that we all understand the context, I'm going to pivot a little bit to talk about plans for the site's redevelopment. As Melissa mentioned at the beginning, there were really 3 vision elements that anchored development of the plan. The first is which integrate the site into Old Town North. And what you see here in the diagram on the right is 4 site access points that are planned for vehicular access into the site. So as Michelle said, this yellow area here is the developable area, and the blue dots indicate planned access points. The 2 access points planned on the south are at the extensions of North Royal Street and North Fairfax Street, and at the north, 2 connections are envisioned off of Slater's Lane. In addition, 2 future potential connections were indicated in the Old Town North Small Area Plan as being a possibility for site development. These are indicated as potential because they will rely upon cooperation with adjacent landowners in order to be realized. The first potential connection is at the extension of North Pitt Street. Now, today, North Pitt does not extend to the borders of the site because there's a building and a property right here. And the second potential connection is shown connecting up to George Washington Parkway and the slip road at East Abingdon. This will require cooperation from adjacent landowners because the geometry of the PRGS site is such that it comes to a tip when it touches East Abingdon Street. Again, all of these connections are consistent with recommendations made in the Old Town North Small Area Plan. And even without the additional 2 potential connections, we are currently performing traffic analyses to demonstrate that the 4 locations that we know are dedicated access points will basically work for all the traffic demands for the site. So vehicles and cars are just one important part of the whole equation, but getting to the second vision point, which is connecting people to the waterfront, we really wanted to understand what the visual connection of a pedestrian entering the site would be. So from these access points that I talked about to the south, we basically ran a view corridor to the waterfront to understand how far and what people entering the site would see at the site's southern boundary. So going east to west, the distance from Fairfax to the water, if you go absolutely straight, is 990 feet. If you go over to Royal Street, it's 1420 feet. And then further up on Pitt, that future aspirational connection is over 1500 feet. So for comparison, we went to Duke Street in Old Town and measured out what a 950 and 1250 foot visual corridor would be, which is approximately where Fairfax and Royal Streets are today. And what we noticed is that as a pedestrian, you're not going to be walking in the middle of the street. So there's many things that will get in your view corridor as you enter and sort of look towards the vista, towards the water. other people, buildings on either side, Great Street trees like the ones we will continue into the site are all things that really impede a visual connection when you're up to, 1,200 feet away from the waterway.
Good evening. My name is Carlos Cubillos. I am with Gensler in Washington, D.C. I'm the Director of Cities and Urban Design. I'm a resident of Bethesda, and hopefully in the future, once this project is built, I could become a resident of Alexandria. Why? Because it has so many attributes that I look for at this stage of my life. It has access to the water, it's close to a bike path. I'm a cyclist. I've done the ride from Bethesda to Mount Vernon many times, so I'm pretty familiar with this part. It has open space, it has views, proximity to an established urban area like Alexandria, is near the airport, it's also near DC. So there's many, many attributes that I found very appealing in this project. But let us talk a little bit about the site. I think the spirit of the place or the DNA of this site is its proximity to the Potomac River. I think this DNA fully justifies the design principle of connecting people to the waterfront, as is set out in the mall area plan. For this, we have taken a good look at memorable waterfronts in other cities to confirm the attributes that help make them successful places. These waterfront locations include, of course, Old Town in Alexandria, Georgetown in nearby DC, San Francisco, Seattle, Toronto, amongst many, many cities. We found that a common characteristic is the way streets form view sheds that link in a perpendicular manner, meaning 90 degrees intersections with the waterfront. This geometric composition allows for the quickest and shortest connection to the water, to what we want to see while creating the simplest of mental maps for users. It is intuitive for us to understand. It is the simplest way to find out our way in a place. Let us start with Alexandria, which you have on the screen right now. The simple grid system of the city that you know so well places streets perpendicular to the water. It makes it easy for you to know where you are and where you may want to go, and it shortens the visual and physical distance. Now, as we move north towards our site in the purple color, along the edge of the Potomac River, we see that the water's edge turns slightly northwest as we approach our site. With the sound objective of shortening visual and physical distances, as we already explained, we are proposing an internal grid of streets and view sheds that adopts the same perpendicular composition that we described before. Let's see what happens in Seattle and in Toronto. So as I said before, similar conditions are found in most, if not all, of the modern waterfront cities we have analyzed. Of course, it happens in Seattle and Toronto, like you can see in these slides. There, like in Alexandria and Georgetown, the perpendicular connections to the water provide a simple and very intuitive way to connect to the water's edge. This perpendicularity not only creates this visual and physical linkage opportunity to users walking and driving to the project, it also helps residents within the buildings that face these streets. The images on the lower left depict these conditions that I find desirable. Again, in many ways similar to what we see in Alexandria. Now let's go back to our site. Within our site, the diagonal space that separates our project from the north part of Alexandria becomes a very interesting inflection point where the grid shifts to respond perpendicularly to the water's edge. This is receiving the north-south grid coming from Alexandria and redirects it to find the water's edge quickly. This inflection point creates a very interesting urban moment, offers transition, surprise, and a reason for people to discover beyond, to see what's going on in the project. The shifting of the grid shortens distances to the water dramatically, being 900 feet the longest, compared with over 1,500 feet if we adopted a straight extension of Fairfax and North Royal streets coming from Alexandria. Other shorter perpendicular connections in the north half of the site, of course, will offer distances close to 700 feet to the water. But why do we make a point about distance to the riverfront? Because it will impact how much and how soon of the water we can really see. In this way, distance really matters. On the lower left, we have taken a very common instrument we use nowadays. Everybody uses it. It's Google Earth. We go to Google Street View, and then we use Wisconsin Avenue in Georgetown. Why did we use it? Because I think most of us know it. And also it's going downhill a little bit. So it has very similar conditions to what we will have in our project. As you can see, when we are 1,300 feet away from the water's edge, it's very hard to see that focal point at the end. You know it is there, but really you do not see it. As you approach the 1,000 mark, you begin to see a glimpse of it. So again, 1,000 feet. But again, when we are 700 feet away from the water, it is very clear, it's very easy to see. Despite of the Freehurst Highway, you can see the water. So this is why we want to make a point about these distances. Now, let us talk about how people and vehicles will move in and out of our site. Our proposal creates two primary north and south connections, each one with different characteristics. One on the west and south edges, or your left, is devoted to normal city traffic, meaning buses and cars for the most part. The other one on the water's edge, or your right, is basically devoted for pedestrians and bicyclists. It will allow to create really a people's first place. It will allow controlled vehicular traffic to go through just for emergency and maybe maintenance purposes, but it's basically a street, a path for people. To enrich the porosity or permeability we want for the project and to allow for easy flow of movement through the site, many other access points are evenly distributed along the south and west boundaries. It creates 6 clear points of physical and visual connections to the water from these many points. And again, we use this perpendicular street layout for the reasons that I already explained. I think it's a very simple and very logical diagram. So now I will give Caroline the chance to explain to us how these two roads behave.
Thanks, Carlos. Carlos described a little bit about that north-south network that runs on the water's edge and then further west into the site. But we really wanted to give some thought to what the character of those streets may be like. So this street, which is what Carlos described of as the normal city street, we're conceiving as a multimodal spine. So this is the location where vehicles, buses, and many deliveries will take place. The street near the water is more people-focused, with cyclists, pedestrians, and other powered by people types of transit. And when you layer on a secondary street network that complements those streets that run on the east and west of the site, you have a very well interconnected grid of streets that provide connectivity and intersections at many points. So again, the characters of the two streets, the working street and sort of the more pedestrian and cycle focused streets, give us opportunities to do special things. So on this street nearest to the water, we've conceived of an area that we're calling a WUNERF. And a WUNERF is a slower or shared street, like this one down here, that has a more free interchange between where pedestrians and cyclists and sometimes cars may move. On the west side of the street over here, where the trucks and buses and cars will frequent, we think that's a great opportunity to plan a multimodal transit hub where buses, bike shares, and other types of micromobility can be co-located for easy access by visitors and residents. So after establishing that network, it gives us a good basis for thinking about where the building blocks are. And at the beginning of the presentation, Michelle said, after we put in the parks and all of the open space and plan for all of the easements, we'll have 7 to 8 acres of developable area. So those are those gray boxes that you see there. Those are actually the building parcels that result from the space left over from streets and sidewalks and open space. So when we set out this sort of grid in these systems, it gives us an idea of what the ground plane experience may start to be on the site. And what this diagram points out is the physical location for arts in this site. And going back to Catherine's principles for development, the Old Town North Small Area Plan always encouraged extension of the North Fairfax Street Arts Corridor into the site. So what you see here on Block A is a proposal for a integrated arts use as part of a building at the termination of Fairfax Street. In addition, we've called out 2 other potential additional arts uses that we think would be great if it could be co-located with green space as outdoor arts venues. Also at the ground plane, we're conceiving of a series of what we're calling mid-block connectors. So those would be alleys that basically cut through development blocks, providing pedestrian access, interior loading access, and access to parking. I also did want to point out that one of the great features of this development is that all of the parking associated with buildings will be located underground. Although we will be offering street parking, the majority of parking will be fulfilled below grade. And just really quickly, again, when you think about the ground plane experience and the vitality of a site, the mix of uses is extremely critical because you need carrots to sort of draw people to different locations and encourage foot traffic. So in the CDD submission, we've anticipated a flexible distribution of uses across all of these development blocks from A to F, including residential, commercial, hotel and retail, again with flexible percentages that can change as the development happens over time and market demands may actually change. The specific design of each of the blocks and the buildings and the architectural features will happen during one of those later phases of development during the DSUP phases. Final configuration of the bulk and massing of the buildings will also be done at that time. The CDD does indicate what potential heights for the buildings on each of the blocks may be, which we've indicated here, and those are also subject to FAA regulations due to the proximity of the site to National Airport. And we do want to talk a little bit about open space, but before we do, we talked about all of the great connectivity through the site, the networks of pedestrians and cyclists, but we also know it's bigger than the site itself. So we understand that the network of shared pedestrian bike paths needs to connect to that on the Norfolk Southern site and to the existing Mount Vernon Trail. So we think that the network we've planned inside the site has great opportunities to interlink and further create those critical interfaces with the Old Town North neighborhood.
Good evening. I'm Bani Amrit Kaur, Senior Development Manager with HRP Mixed Use Development Team. The third primary driver of design for PRGS is to provide meaningful and varied open space. The goal is to seamlessly design and integrate on-site green open space with neighboring parks. When developed, there will be approximately 13.6 acres, coherent and accessible community area that will play a vital role in Alexandria's open space network. We all want that tall fence which has made this project an island, disconnected from the community for decades, to be removed. Our aim is that you, the users, our community, should feel no boundary line between our project's waterfront park and the National Park Service property on the east side. We hope this will make it a more active stretch, act as a connection to Mount Vernon Trail, and effectively bring waterfront closer to you. A similar integration is planned for the on-site linear park on the southwest edge of the property with the future park on the Norfolk Southern parcel.
Thanks, Bonnie. My name is Simon Beer, landscape architect with OJB Landscape Architecture in Boston. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more in detail about these open space typologies that Bonnie had just covered. We wanted to start by discussing the open space adjacent to the Potomac River and National Park Service land. Certainly, the river is what our team considers to be one of the greatest assets to this site. And our goal is to further expand the open space that takes advantage of this connection to the water, providing amazing views to the river and opportunities to activate the water plane. In this configuration, we are proposing 2.5 acres of waterfront open space in addition to the waterfront land held by the National Park Service. Expanding the waterfront open space is conceived in the small area plan. Along the southern edge of the site, 1.7 acres of linear open space is proposed within our site, in addition to the adjacent potential rail park on the Norfolk Southern land. These parallel adjacent areas can be designed as one holistic linear park that offers incredible varied program and different in this open space. As the small area plan proposes, this open space will include active recreation with passive park spaces, and we're conceptualizing potential children's play areas, botanical areas, and gracious pedestrian walkways. In addition to these open spaces, we've been contemplating that have been contemplated in the small area plan. The proposal provides additional differentiated open spaces throughout. In the heart of the development, a gracious public plaza is planned that engages and connects with the waterfront park. While this space is still in concept, the team envisions the space will have be a lively urban plaza with groves of trees, art, engaging water features, and an active retail experience on the ground floor plan. Michelle had mentioned the remaining Pepco station as well in the northwest corner of the site. And we're proposing to take advantage of the land right adjacent to that and to its east by creating a linear open space adjacent to it. So along with an artful vertical architectural screening implementation along this edge, the linear open space will provide walkways and seating areas, even with the potential for a linear dog run as an amenity to residents and the public. This additional green space also allows us to complete a circumventing concept of open space around the perimeter of the site. We also just wanted to mention that as a redevelopment of an industrial site, our team is considering ways to reintroduce existing site infrastructure into the new design and breathing new life into it for public use. So for example, the pump station at the edge of the waterfront is being considered for adaptive reuse as a new amenity with occupiable space above and inside while providing dynamic views towards the water. So while we are proposing that all of the streetscapes throughout this development be green with comfortable pedestrian proportions, we're particularly excited about the pedestrian prioritized Woonurf street that Carolyn had mentioned earlier in the presentation. This connection provides an opportunity for us to create porosity between the central plaza mentioned earlier and the waterfront open space. This Woonurf would have the potential to limit vehicular traffic at certain times and create larger, more contiguous open space for larger public gatherings within it, like events and markets and things like that. So we're excited about all of the potential for these varied open spaces, and we're looking forward to sharing more information with you as the program and plans develop.
I want to take this opportunity to re-emphasize our commitment to provide meaningful open space. Putting together all the layers Simon walked us through at the master plan level, we have 5.2 acres on-site open space on ground level. In addition to the waterfront park and the linear park, green areas which were envisioned in the Old Town North Small Area Plan, the Waterfront Plaza intends to be a focal point for this development with flexible programming and event space. Moreover, additional open spaces will be planned for each parcel in due course.
Thanks, Bonnie. As you've just heard, a significant amount of thought went into preparing for this first submission to the city. It's called a Concept 1 submission, and as Catherine described, there will be further submissions coming as part of this process. As the city described earlier, this is an overall plan for general guidelines for the development that will be permitted, and here's what's included in that plan set. We have to describe what are the existing conditions. Michelle went over the existing conditions on the site with you. We have to disclose the existing impervious area in the RPA, which we talked about earlier. I think Michelle was talking about that as well. This is a redevelopment, so we have to show what is already impervious under the existing conditions. We have to show areas of potential environmental impact, which we did. Then we go into land use diagrams, and Carolyn went through that in terms of the potential mix of uses on the site that's going to be determined as part of this process. We also have to show building height maps, and Carolyn describes that we're looking for a little relief on the height restrictions in the Old Town North Small Area Plan based on these site constraints and the open space that we're providing. All of this, though, is subject to the FAA limitations. We also have to provide an open space and a circulation plan. Bonnie and Simon described the open space that we are contemplating, and Carolyn and Carlos talked about the circulation patterns that we're envisioning. All of these plans are available both on the city's website about our project and HRP's project website, both of which are listed here and will be available at the end of the presentation. With that, we'd like to move on to community questions. Okay. We're going to start at the beginning. We've had a number of questions that have been put in the Q&A. And so the first one is, how will Hilco remove deconstruction debris from the site? And I'm going to turn that over to Melissa.
Oh, thanks, Mary Catherine. Excuse me, my kitty cats, Bonnie and Clyde, are having a little cat fight here on the side. The joys of Zoom meetings. That's a great question. I will be honest, it's a little early in the process. We likely will not begin deconstruction of the power plant until probably late next year, after we've gotten through both the CDD process and then also submitted our infrastructure plans, as Catherine Malarius mentioned, and gone through a number of other approvals. So I will tell you that we do attempt to retain on site as many materials as we can that are able to be preserved on the site, such as sometimes we reuse the concrete and use that for backfill. So we will try to be doing those sorts of things in order to minimize the amount of material that's being transported off site. But that's something that we will be focused on probably more likely next year.
Thanks, Melissa. The next question, who decides which zoning, height, open space is appropriate for the blocks in the site within the CDD, and when does that occur? And I'm happy to start the answer to that and pass it over to you, Melissa. This is a great question, but this is exactly what we're doing right now. Ultimately, the Planning Commission recommends to the City Council, and the City Council decides what are the appropriate amounts of zoning, height, open space for each block. But that's why we had a almost two year planning process through Old Town North to actually look at how much development is available or is necessary to transform this site. And now we're looking at the individual blocks. But yes, we're going to go through that as part of this whole process. But for a maybe a better, more descriptive answer, I'm going to turn that over to Melissa.
No, I think you answered it. I think there were heights that were envisioned in the small area plan. As we've gotten more information on the site, we are looking for a little bit of additional relief in certain areas of the site. But I think that's the process that we're in now.
Okay. The next one is, I believe that a clarification of affordable housing would be helpful, as income levels to qualify for affordable housing is not well understood. And I'd be happy to take that one as well, Melissa, if that works for you. We actually have somebody from the Office of Housing who's on as an attendee to our meeting tonight, Tamara Jovovich. But we actually have different levels of affordable housing in Alexandria. It goes by sort of percentages of the average median income. There's public housing, which is at the lowest level of affordability. And then we move up to what the city sort of standard in most cases is 60% of the AMI, the average median income for Alexandria itself. But we've been looking at different types of affordability in terms of what's called workforce housing. That's somewhere between 60 and 80% of the average median income. Your typical teacher, firefighter, city staff person, that kind of a percentage. And so there are several different levels of affordable housing that the city contemplates moving forward. Did you want to add anything to that, Melissa?
No, I think you
Oh,
covered it great.
okay. We have a couple environmental questions, and we have members of our team, our environmental consultants and members of the actual HRP staff. So I thought I'd put those together and we can answer them. I won't ask them all at one time, but I'll ask them in succession in the sort of an environmental section. And let's go through those. First, we live nearby. What precautions will be taken when dismantling the power station so that lead and other toxic materials don't go into the air and affect surrounding residents? So Juliana, do you want to take that question?
Sure. Thanks, Mary Catherine. Hi, everyone. My name is Juliana Connolly, and I lead environmental remediation work for HRP, so both here in Alexandria and throughout the country. And it's a great question. There are potentially hazardous materials present inside the former power plant buildings. Lead is one that was mentioned in the question, and lead can be present in paints, in lead-based paints that may have been used historically in the building. Another constituent that is often present in these types of building is asbestos that would have been used as insulation on piping and that sort of thing. So to protect against potential exposure during deconstruction, there's a couple phases of activities that will occur to protect against that exposure. The first is prior to any deconstruction work, we will do surveys of the interiors of the building to identify where these materials will be located. That's done through both visual inspection and then chemical or physical sort of sampling and then analysis of the materials. So for lead-based paint, you can't see the lead with your eyes, but so all painted materials will be sampled and analyzed for lead so that we'll know whether those paints contain lead. And then asbestos can be initially, suspicious materials can be identified visually, and then they'll be sampled and sent to the laboratory to confirm whether asbestos is present in those materials. So that's the very first important step, is figuring out where those materials are located. The next step is that where those materials are located, particularly with respect to asbestos, they'll be abated under very specific conditions prior to deconstruction. And those types of specific conditions include using containment areas, so tents or other sort of enclosures as a way to think about it, so that the asbestos fibers can be removed. Those tents are typically under what's called negative pressure. And so what that means is that the air is controlled inside those spaces so that air is flowing only into that containment zone. So there is no potential for the asbestos fibers, for example, to migrate outside of those tents. So those types of hazardous materials are removed first. They're abated prior to the deconstruction work proceeding. And that's just sort of big picture how that process works.
Okay, thank you. I had some issues with my video, so I think I'm just gonna, I'll just unmute myself because apparently my video was jumping around. So the next question on environmental remediation is, let me scroll back up. Will the tract of land that HRP is planning to develop require any hazardous material remediation? If not, why?
That's a great question. Yeah, the very simple answer is yes. We know what some of the areas that will require remediation, in particular We know there is one area sort of behind the power plant buildings where there was a historic release from some underground storage tanks. There was a fuel oil release. The prior owner has completed some remediation work and has made some progress in cleaning up the majority of those impacts. So there are residual impacts that remain that we'll address during our redevelopment work as that area becomes sort of more accessible, more physically accessible. So that's one that we know for sure. I expect there will be others, and we have to go find them. And that's a process that we're actually going to start next week. We're going to start doing some soil and groundwater sampling at the site to identify other potential areas of contamination that may require remediation. So the way that this works is we know a lot about the past use of the site, where chemicals were stored, where coal was stored, where other sorts of activities occurred that could have resulted in contamination to the subsurface, so to the soil and groundwater. But we don't know exactly if that contamination occurred or the extent to which the soil and groundwater is contaminated yet. And so the way that we figure that out is we go and we collect soil and groundwater samples. We send those to a laboratory for chemical analysis, and that's where we start figuring out where the contamination is present, and then we can develop a remedial approach to address that contamination. So the very simple answer is yes, remediation will occur at a minimum for this petroleum contamination that we know about, and likely for other areas of contamination that we will identify through soil and groundwater sampling. That will start as early as next week.
Thanks, Juliana. There actually was another question that asked how long remediation might take.
Yeah, that's a great question that I'm not going to have a very specific answer to right now, partially because of the answer that you just heard me give, which is that we are just at the beginning of figuring out where and the extent, so both the type and the size, essentially, is how I would think about it, of the contamination that may be present in soil and groundwater. We do expect that the remediation will occur sort of in coordination with redevelopment. So most of the remediation work will be complete by the time you see buildings complete and that sort of thing, but it might be quicker and there might be portions of it that extend longer, and we'll know more about that as we get into the sampling and we have more data, and we'll certainly share that information as we move along and have more specifics about the remediation plans at the site.
So we keep getting a couple others. So Juliana, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat for a moment.
Sure.
How much contamination is anticipated to remain is another question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So and again, I'll talk about it sort of conceptually at this point until we have data and specific plans, and then we will be able to speak to it more specifically. So we'll be doing the sampling, and depending on the types of constituents that are present and sort of the extent to which they're present, will determine what remediation technologies might be available to us to address that sort of contamination. So are there what we might refer to as in situ technologies, so technologies that occur in the ground that might be able to address some contamination? It depends on what we find, and so that's a question that we'll be able to answer more specifically as we know more about the nature and extent of the impacts in the soil and groundwater.
This one might be, you might have a similar answer to this question, but another environmental question. Are there still radioactivity issues due to fly ash around this plant?
Coal was used as a fuel source for this power plant, and so as a result, there would have been coal ash produced as part of that process. Because of the small footprint of this property, small compared to some others that we have worked on, coal ash was not stored in significant quantities on the ground surface. So there would have been silos containing coal ash, there would have been coal ash inside the buildings, but there was not significant storage of coal ash on the property itself. I hope that answers that question. That is different than some other power plants where you'll see significant coal ash storage and management on the real estate itself.
Okay. And I think the last environmental question we have at the moment, are you doing any air sampling for or as part of your testing?
Yeah, I'm just, the reason I'm hesitant, there's lots of types of air sampling, and there will definitely be different types of air sampling done at different phases of the work. So the very simple answer is yes, there will be air sampling. One example would be what I was talking about before during abatement of asbestos. There's a significant amount of air sampling that is done both during the abatement work and at the completion of the abatement work to demonstrate that the asbestos has successfully been removed. So there's definitely air sampling for asbestos. There will likely be air sampling for dust and other nuisance conditions as we proceed, and there may be other air sampling as well once we have a clearer understanding of the nature and extent of contaminants present in the subsurface.
Thanks, Juliana. One of the things I did want to mention is we talked earlier about having additional meetings with the community moving forward and about specific topics of meetings. And so this topic is actually going to be the lead of a particular meeting that we're going to have. So we'll be able to delve a little bit more deeply into these issues when we set that meeting up. But we want to make sure everybody knows that that's going to be an opportunity moving forward. Okay, I'm going to go back to the top of the list. Would it make sense for Dominion to buy the substation? What's the advantage of Pepco owning ownership without the coal plant? And Melissa, I think I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Well, that's an interesting one. I can't really speak for Dominion, but I could say that definitively, if Pepco were selling the substation, we would definitely be first in line to buy it. I'm not sure if folks are aware, but the coal-fired power plant portion of the site that we purchased had actually been ground leased to GenOn for many, many years. And so Pepco was no longer using that portion. They have retained the substation even before us acquiring the site that we now have, and they intend to keep the substation active. It does feed the district and not Alexandria and Northern Virginia. So maybe that helps provide some clarity.
Thanks. The next question, would it be possible to complete the construction with no off-street or garage parking? To do so would be a bold statement ensuring an exciting, intentional, even bohemian clientele for residential and retail tenants. This would also increase the amount of developable area significantly.
Well, that is a very bold idea. I guess it would not increase the developable area for us because we have made the decision and the commitment early on to put all of the site parking below grade, with the exception of some street parking, right, for visitors to use as they come to the site. So what I can say is that we are firm believers in the future technologies that will be available to us, both in terms of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. And those will be considerations that we will factor in to our design of the parking facilities on the site, as well as, we're firm believers in transit, and we've already spoken with Dash about the extension of the bus routes that they are planning in the area. So you heard Caroline speak a little bit earlier this evening about the idea of having a sort of mobility hub on the site where, a person might arrive on a bus, maybe pick up a little scooter or a shared bicycle, and go to either points within the development or points beyond in Old Town North. So we're considering multimodal transportation definitely in order to reduce the reliance on single occupancy vehicles. But I think we're not quite there yet as a society to build a completely carless development.
Thanks, Melissa. The next question is, who as the company or the assigned lead exactly is conducting the traffic study? When will it be done, and what are its parameters? So I did want to note that Grove Slade is the traffic consultant for this project, and Police Brickta is actually one of our panelists who is available to answer the rest of those questions. Police?
Thanks, Mary Catherine. I think my video is working. Yes, I'm Felice Brickta with Grove Slade, and we're working on the transportation study for the site right now. We're actually currently in the process of finalizing the scoping assumptions with the city And that scoping agreement will really define the parameters of the study that we're working on. There was a transportation study that was done for the Old Town North small area plan. So this study will really be a refinement of that to further study some site-specific elements of the transportation network. And so we're working on that. As far as timing, we're looking at a submittal of the study probably toward the end of, or by the end of this year, the transportation study.
I also wanted to add that we asked the National Park Service to participate in this scoping process. So since they own the parkway, that they were a participant in determining what the scope of the traffic study would be. So I just wanted to add that, but thanks, Felice. The next question, who owns the land on East Abingdon where one of the potential access points may be placed? Melissa?
So, and I don't know if Carolyn could flip all the way back to one of those plans, but as you probably noticed, our land comes to a point there, so we really don't have enough dimension to effectively insert any kind of intersection. But there's the Norfolk Southern land just to the south of us, and we've been coordinating with the city and other abutters to look at what the possibility is to acquire that land under a rails to trails conversion. And if we're able to achieve the that intersection out to George Washington Parkway, it would most likely have to be on that land. And it would require extensive coordination with the National Park Service as well. We're already in discussions with them and have raised that with them. And the last thing I will say is that that intersection, whether it exists or not, will also be part of the traffic study.
Thanks. So we have a pretty specific question. Where is the proposed 200-room hotel located on the site? Melissa, I'm gonna turn that over to you.
The short answer is that we've initially proposed it on block F. The longer answer is that we're building some flexibility into the plan so that if there were an opportunity to do it on one of the other sites, we would look to one of those other sites as well. But generally speaking, we envision that the development will sort of proceed from south to north. And we want to make sure that we have enough critical mass of development there for a hotel to be viable. So it's probably in one of the later phases.
And I did want to just point out that I don't know that there's been any determination that there's a 200-room hotel or the particular size of the hotel.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's just a hotel use that we're looking to include as a flexible use on the site. Next question. What are the long rectangular and small 6 buildings at the northwest corner just outside your property line? Carolyn, if you could just go to one of the context slides, just even that one, that's fine.
Oh, I think that's Pepco.
Correct.
That's the substation.
That's the substation itself and the devices that are adjacent to within the substation.
That's right.
Okay, next question. How many stories would a building of 50 to 65 feet be?
So that's the building that we're thinking about for block A. We envision that building of somewhere between 3 and 4 stories. So depending on what kind of arts use we might house there, you would see a much taller ground floor level and then maybe a story or 2 or even maybe 3 up above.
Thanks. Next question. Please comment on the tree canopy and ground level unorganized open space by percentage of the total developable property.
We might want to have Simon jump in. If I understand that correctly, I think they're asking about maybe just the amount of green space, and they say unorganized as opposed to more designed, like plaza type of open space. Does that sound right?
I think that's what it sounds like.
Melissa, I didn't quite make out the whole question, but certainly can speak to tree canopy as we've been studying that. And as an industrial site with limited green capacity on it today, I can certainly promise the increase of tree canopy with the open spaces provided. Now, what the percentages are, to the future growth and development of that, we'll certainly be calculating that through the design process and understanding the differentials between existing and proposed as we move forward.
If you could go, Carolyn, to the last slide on open space, we actually had a total list of the amount of open space that we're proposing. So that's just the new open space that we're proposing on our site, in addition to the fact that each of the blocks will have open space that's likely to be on rooftop levels and things of that nature, because we're working that in and out. And that's in addition to the amount of open space that surrounds us. And so, Melissa, did you have something to add to that?
Well, just to go back to, I think maybe part of the question was about, areas that are more active, maybe versus more passive, to the unorganized comment. So we will be having one of our future meetings, we'll be diving much deeper into the design of the open space. Obviously, right now you're looking at, just sort of green blobs on the page. So that obviously all needs to be planned. And we're very much considering what wants to feel more passive, where somebody's just taking a stroll or maybe sitting on a bench reading a book, versus where are areas where you want more activity, like near the plaza where you could host an event, or maybe even along the linear park where you might have some kind of recreational activity, like some kind of ball court or a playground or those sorts of things. So I think there will be a good distribution of different kinds of open space around the site, and a good differentiation between open space along the waterfront and what's usable and interesting there versus along the linear park. And we're very much considering all of that in our planning and design processes.
Thanks, Melissa. I think this is a sustainability question coming up. To what extent are water, electricity, and waste providers being involved at this early stage to provide insights on technology and system innovations to provide financial and environmental benefits? And I think I'm going to start with you on that, Melissa, and you might want to send that to Sustainable Building Partners.
Yeah, or maybe Christopher Consultants, because it's definitely a scope of work that touches a variety, or it's an area that touches different scopes or different disciplines within the design team. So we are beginning early coordination conversations with the budding utilities, so that we can understand capacity issues and all of that. And we certainly are starting to think out of the box. I mentioned electric vehicles a little bit earlier, and autonomous vehicles. So we're thinking about those kinds of things. But these are early conversations. I can just tell you as a development professional, these are lengthy conversations as well. And I think that would be better addressed in an upcoming infrastructure conversation. And I don't know, Mike or Kevin, if you have anything you want to add to that, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I think you covered it. Basically, that's why this process in the public realm is layered, right? You identify buildings, layout, streetscape, open space, and then once you sort of have that configured, you start to layer in the infrastructure, which is utilities in and out, stormwater, electric service, that sort of thing. And I think, not just how we're getting utilities to the site, but being mindful of the resource use for them. So looking to use landscape and open space to sort of mitigate the need for engineered-based stormwater management solutions. Electrification from a carbon perspective, but also utility resources from building efficiency. So looking to not do more harm, but really be mindful of the utilities that we're using, which is why you have sort of that layered process, which would all come out of the infrastructure plan and how utilities are coming in and out of the site.
I think the one thing I would add, Kevin, let me know if you want to jump in, is that the infrastructure plan is the first DSUP that will come forward after approval of the CDD concept plan. As Catherine Miliaris described, that's an important aspect of the next phase as we move forward, and we'll be considering all those things so that this is an iterative process, so that we're not waiting until we get approval to do that, but that's the next phase of approval as we move through this process. All right, the next.
You're correct, Mary Catherine. And as part of that next phase, and we're further along when we get into the final site plan processing as well.
Thanks, Kevin. Next question, who will be responsible for all the green space? Will you share maintenance with the National Park Service for their land along the river? I'm gonna turn that over to you, Melissa.
So we are in early coordination with the Park Service and the city. We, are proposing some improvements on the Park Service land. There will be a discussion about how would those improvements be maintained, and if there are ways that if there are things that the Park Service wants to achieve and projects that we could help them with. We're open to those conversations as well. So those are the kinds of things that we're in discussion with them about, and will be in discussion with them for probably the next several months, if not years.
Thanks. Another question on open space. Of the open space shown in the plan, how much of it is flat and or at a moderate grade, i.e. useful as open space? Simon, I think that might be for you.
I think that's a great question. And we've actually been looking at that pretty extensively, in particular to the waterfront open space. And that's actually one of the reasons that we had moved the roadway back somewhat towards the development to offer some more flat space to the waterfront park. You'll notice that kind of kink in the roadway there, where that area flattens out pretty extensively. And in fact, in this current kind of design and configuration of the waterfront open space on our property, 86% of that is flat and usable. While we certainly do want to engage the grade down to the water, we think that that flat space is a premium, and I think is a wonderful question.
Simon, how about the flat space along the linear park as well?
That's another great question. In general, on our property, the majority of that is flat, while the Norfolk Southern land, particularly on the south side, does slope somewhat more aggressively. Thinking about planning different programs that could be integrated into that slope, like bleacher seating for activation of active recreation, could be a great way to utilize that in a meaningful way. So we're continuing to study those opportunities now.
Thanks. Next question, will the Pepco land still be fenced? Melissa.
So Pepco still controls their land, and they still have an active substation on it, and it does need to be secured. Having said that, we do have the right to screen the substation visually, and we have been coordinating with them on early ideas of what that might look like. We want to be able to screen it from all dimensions, not just, along the eastern edge of it facing the site. So we're talking to them about something that would go all the way around it and provide a much nicer visual vista than is there today. And in addition to that, as we pointed out on the open space plans, there's a landscape kind of linear park or linear buffer designed along that edge as well to give a little bit of setback from the substation.
Thank you. Next question. As a neighbor, I very much welcome the mixed-use development of all of the former power plant property. I noticed the land along East Abingdon, immediately south of Slater's Lane, is not included in HRP's development. Why? Melissa?
The land along East Abingdon, immediately
I think it's the
south
parking lot.
Oh, the Pepco parking lot.
Yep.
Yes, that's also retained by Pepco. Yep.
Okay. Next question, also on open space and landscaping. I hope there will be a commitment to use native trees and plants as the majority of the landscaping of the site, especially as the site relates to National Park Service land and other parkland. It's important to allow the landscape to relate to the existing natural ecosystem. There are a number of efforts already in North Old Town, C. Montgomery Park, and Alexandria House Park. Simon, I think that's you.
Francis, we couldn't agree more. I think there's a commitment to sustainability with this project. And when it comes to open space and landscape, I think the use of native trees and plants is paramount to that. In fact, Melissa had mentioned we've been in some initial conversations with the National Park Service and the land in particular at the water's edge. And even they have the sense of allowing the look and feel of the national park land to continue into the site. And I think that's our design goal as we continue forward.
Thanks, Simon. Next question. Do you have an image of the existing pump house?
There might be in the very beginning of the presentation. I think there's a close-up there. Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to zoom in, but if you've, I'm sure that all the folks have been on the Mount Vernon Trail and gone through the caged area. The pump house is the building that's just landward of the cage. And that's a structure that, as we mentioned, we think has some historic value and some interest, in fact, in how the power plant operated. It's also very close to the water. So we'd like to be able to preserve that and put an active use in it so that people could enjoy that perspective. And we will bring more images at our future open space meeting so that people can get a better idea of what the vision is for that.
Thanks. Next question. Are there any intrusions, drains, pipelines, et cetera, into the Potomac from the site that you'll be responsible for removing?
Kevin, do you want to take this one? There are some existing outfalls.
Yes, I'll take that one, Melissa. Good evening, all. My name is Kevin Washington. I'm with Christopher Consultants. We're the land civil engineers on the project. Currently, when Pepco controlled the property, they identified 6 outfalls to the Potomac River. And while 4 of them were decommissioned by Pepco, currently there are 2 outfalls that currently drain the site today. One is to the north, which drains the Pepco parking lot that is still maintained by Pepco. So we would have to keep that one active. And the existing storm drainage tunnels that is shown on the slide now. We're going to try to utilize that outfall to drain our property to the Potomac River. So like I said, if there are any intrusions of the 4 previous outfalls that were decommissioned, that's a sewer eye to the green space along the river, we will take a look at removing those as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. The next question, are there any low-income housing at the site, and what is an innovation unit? So I think those are 2 different questions. Low-income housing, it depends on what your definition of low-income housing is. I described earlier, the city has several different ways to look at affordable housing. There's public housing, which is very low income, but then there's middle income, 60% of the AMI, as I described, average median income, and then there's workforce housing. And so we're looking at what the city's affordable housing policy is and how we'll apply that policy to this site. What's an innovation unit? That actually was a term that was brought up in the Old Town North Small Area Planning process. When I was sitting on the stakeholders group, the city was really encouraging of finding uses where you could actually provide space for the innovative market, for uses that we don't know about or the uses that are developing currently, and finding space for those types of uses in some fashion in new developments. And so I think that's a definition that's a word that's looking for a definition as part of this process as we move forward. And so we continue to look to work with the city on what that definition is. Next question. All traffic seems to flow to or through Slater's. Slater's at Abingdon has been a failed intersection for decades. How do you keep the Fairfax Royal from becoming cut through from Old Town through your property and gridlock at Slater's to and from the Parkway? Melissa, maybe start with you, and then maybe there's Grove Slade can help us with that answer as well.
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on the direction that people are coming from, and the traffic study will analyze this. I think there is more than just the in and out from Slater's Lane, and we certainly hope that people are going to do more than just cut through the property, but that the property will also be a destination for folks. But Felice, you could probably give a much better technical answer than I can.
Yeah, well, I think that that's definitely something that we're going to be diving into more as we get into the details of the analysis that we're just kind of in the beginning stages of. I think, but it is a great point, and I think it's something that was looked at a bit with the small town, the Old Town North Small Area Plan study that was done previously. So we'll just be taking even a closer look at these intersections. And I know the east-west connection that was shown on the plan and that was mentioned earlier, I think is another way that we can look at distributing trips, but while also, not encouraging cut through traffic. And I think just as the site design continues to be refined, I think that's something that we'll definitely be keeping in mind, just, how site design elements can also discourage that kind of cut through trips.
I think one of the things also to mention is transportation is going to be one of our topical meetings as we move forward, so that we'll be able to do a major deep dive into this topic as well moving forward. Okay, thank you. Will the affordable housing planned for this site only be market rate, or is there an opportunity to include subsidized housing for people at lower levels of income? Let me take that one, Melissa. I think there's a little bit of a confusion in the question itself, because affordable housing isn't market rate housing. It is particularly set normally through the Virginia guidelines, the VHDA guidelines that come down from the federal government and HUD. And so we use those rates to determine what our levels of affordability are in terms of rents. Is there an opportunity to include subsidized housing for people at lower levels of income? What we're looking at through the city's affordable housing policy is how normally, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, the city's affordable housing policy is based on the level of development that you are achieving on your site. And it's a calculation for how much a contribution might be to the city. And then we talk with them about how we apply that contribution moving forward on site, or does the city want to utilize it for other purposes? We actually need to determine how much development we have on the site before we get to the next level of determining what amount of affordable housing can be incorporated onto the site, or is the money useful by the city elsewhere. But we will be talking to the city Office of Housing on this particular issue moving forward. The next one, I think, was just a typo from somebody else, because it's mixed use, not misused. The next one is another traffic question. Will there be any traffic calming measures taken to reduce cut through traffic? Felice, I think you actually started to talk about that in your answer.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, I think that's something that we'll continue to take a look at as the site design evolves. Just right. How that's different things occurring along the street, on-street parking, just the design kind of the streets kind of throughout the network will evolve, and I think can help discourage cut through traffic and kind of act as traffic calming measures. But I think that's something that will continue to be studied. Sorry, Melissa.
And I would add, I think that the form of the streets that we've proposed is in and of itself a traffic calming measure. This is not a highway, right? It's not meant to be a thoroughfare that people speed through. And in fact, along the waterfront street, right, we're introducing this concept of the Wooner, where pedestrians and bikes feel very much at home and cars feel a little out of place. So the goal, I think, overall, obviously, there's no question there will be traffic. The project will generate traffic. That's what we're going to have to study in the traffic study. And out of that study, we'll come up with a series of mitigations that the project will implement over time in order to mitigate the impacts from this project. Some of those were contemplated already in the small area plan, but I would just kind of emphasize that one of the things that is in our goals, as you heard as we presented, is that this is a place where people have an opportunity to sort of slow down and enjoy the waterfront, and enjoy the mixed use environments, enjoy the arts component that's there. And we're, encouraging that. And so I think it's important to understand that just the formal properties of what we propose, in other words, the shape of the roads, is in and of itself going to be a traffic calming device.
I think that actually segues into one of the other questions we have, which is you repeatedly mentioned the North Fairfax extension assembling being, sorry, that's a typo, a cycle and pedestrian extension, but several times mentioned vehicular traffic. How is that compatible with cycles and pedestrian traffic, and how and when would it be included? And I think that you were just describing that, Melissa, in terms of the WUNRF and how that the design, the goal of the design of that is to be encouraging of pedestrians and bikes and discouraging of vehicles in its design, so that more of them will take the spine road versus the WUNRF. That would be part of the design process.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And Mary Catherine, I think there's lots of different types of WUNRF opportunities, but certainly materiality and the feeling, as Melissa's been saying, is going to change on this segment of roadway where pedestrians and bicyclists feel like they have the priority, yet vehicles can still utilize this within certain times.
And I'm gonna continue with some of the vehicular traffic questions, when some of which I think the answers are going to be, we're going to answer them with the traffic study, but just so that we sort of lump those together so we can get through those. As a excuse me, as a prospective purchaser at the Muse, what is anticipated volume of traffic on the Fairfax extension? Felice, I'll turn that over to you, but I think the answer is we don't know that yet because we haven't completed the study, but we're going to have those answers as we move forward through the study. Is that accurate?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And we've started to do some preliminary kind of looks at the volumes just based on the program, and looking back at the small area plan study, which again, that there was a transportation study done as part of that. So we're refining it further as we're re-looking at that analysis based on this specific site, but so that has some information, but yeah, we're going to be refining it further as we get more into the analysis.
Thanks. Next one on traffic. Has your team considered how these street vehicle connections, especially the one via North Royal, which is currently a largely residential street in the blocks adjacent to this property, will impact traffic flow and volume? Have traffic studies been done on how these limited entries into the site, North Royal in particular, has a designated on-road bike path, and increased traffic creates a safety issue there? I think that's the same answer that we are going to be doing this traffic study, and we'll be including that as part of our discussion moving forward. Melissa, do you want to add to that?
I might just add to that because I do think that part of what we're going to study, just so people understand this, is not only vehicular traffic, but also bicycle traffic, bus traffic, pedestrians, those sorts of things. So it's a priority for us to make sure that, the development is safe. And I think, when you start to talk about, you do the study, you understand what the impacts are, then you design mitigations so that you're mitigating it. Part of that can and probably will be new bike lanes, separated bike lanes, protected by those sorts of things can be part of what the development delivers in order to make those conditions better.
Thanks. Another traffic question. How do you plan to deal with the traffic backup at Slater's Lane in East Abingdon, which is already rated as F? I think, Felice, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I think again, that's definitely an intersection that we'll be studying as we get further into the analysis. And again, I think we'll be looking at all the whole street network, the potential for the east-west connection, and how that will distribute trips further. So I think that's definitely part of what we'll be studying further.
Okay. Here's another question.
And Mary Catherine, we might mention, just for folks who may not be that familiar with the small area plan, but there was a vision that this project would deliver some improvements to that intersection as well. So we might, as part of the study, we're going to have to look at what can be done there to improve the existing conditions today and the conditions once the development is fully online as well.
Okay. One of the next questions on that is, how will you engage the property owners along Slater's Lane in the transportation study scoping?
So we're in the process of finalizing our scoping assumptions right now. So I think that's something that we typically work through with the city, closely with TES. And I think typically we'll have that discussion with the city. We'll do our first our analysis, and I think at that point we'll be in a better position to answer some of these initial questions that we've been hearing, and then have that discussion. I know Melissa mentioned that there was going to be a transportation kind of specific discussion further in the process into the process. So I think at that point, once we have some more answers to some of these really good questions, that'll be the time to really engage with
Sure.
the community.
And this one I think is a pretty specific one as well, which might have the same answer, but I wanted to make sure it was voiced. The traffic signal at the intersection at Slater's and the GW Parkway offers approximately 15 to 30 seconds for cars to enter the parkway from the east. How can all of the proposed traffic be accommodated, not to mention the existing commuter traffic that loses Slater's Lane coming east from the Monroe Street Bridge, added to which there is a large amount of bicycle traffic at this intersection going in all directions. And I think the same answer that Felice just provided was that that's going to be considered as part of this traffic study. But as Melissa just indicated, the improvements to that intersection were contemplated in the Old Town North Small Area Plan. So that will be a part of this process as well. And that's actually one of the reasons we engaged with the National Park Service on scoping, is because they own that intersection and they own it for both sides of the parkway. And so they have to be participants in figuring out how to make the situation better moving forward.
And just to chime in on that, because people may not understand that adjustments to what's called signal timing, which is how long is that light green, can be proposed as part of the development for some of our, as one mitigation that we could do to make adjustments on how that signal functions.
Yep. That's definitely something we'll be looking at, signal timing and phasing, just even the phasing of the traffic signal and making sure
Right.
that kind of is optimized.
Yep, and I think in terms of traffic, one of the other questions, will the pedestrians and bicyclists all be on the same trail, or will they be separated but parallel? This is sort of a traffic question, but Simon, it also might be more of the open space additional trail issue.
It's a great question. And as the Mount Vernon Trail is sort of a shared use trail today, we're certainly envisioning that would be maintained as a shared use trail. However, the development and the work done adjacent to the property and on the National Park Service property would offer some additional pedestrian outlets to help unclog, if you will, the Mount Vernon Trail and some of that north-south movement. There's going to be a lot of the circulation patterns will certainly change quite a bit with the opening up of this property as a public space. And so the dynamics of that Mount Vernon Trail are certainly going to change some, but still envisioned as a shared use path.
Okay, another question that's sort of a combined, will you be improving the Mount Vernon Trail bridge you referred to as the cage, and will you address the infestation of kudzu, a non-native invasive plant along that bridge and fronting the river? Simon, I think that's you.
Another great question. And yes, the Mount Vernon Trail will still address the pump station. Now, given the grades, it's still likely that it'll come in front of the pump station. However, in a much more friendly environment than the cage that's there today. And absolutely on the invasive species within that property, we've already been in discussion with the National Park Service about opportunities to take care of some of the invasive species and help to clear some of that out, and essentially manage and maintain as a part of this development some of the infestations that have happened within that National Park Service land.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, I think those were our transportation questions. If we have others, we'll get to those.
The existing torpedo factory arts facility.
You cut out a little bit, Mary Catherine, but I can see the question here on the torpedo factory arts facility. So I think, you know, in terms of the relationship between our site and that site, you know, obviously that's in the center of Old Town, and we're in Old Town North, but along that whole Fairfax Street corridor is a vision to continue to develop the arts and cultural district that exists there. And we're very excited to be kind of maybe the other end of it up on this site. And so we think extending that Fairfax Street into the site and then providing along it some significant arts uses will be a really exciting aspect of the development. Hope that answers the question.
If Mary Catherine is having difficulties, I can jump in to be the moderator.
Sure.
Great. So the next question is, there are major flooding issues with the George Washington Memorial Parkway. So what will your development plan do so as not to compound this problem?
I think that's something that we're gonna have to, Kevin, did you want to start to say something?
Yeah, Melissa,
I heard your voice.
we're gonna plan for the appropriate storm infrastructure to be in place to handle our development program. And then the anticipation is to have our site outfall to the Potomac River. So I don't anticipate our site having any concerns with additional flooding on the GW Parkway, because we will design our system to handle the redevelopment flows and outfall to the Potomac River.
Great. The next question is, deconstruction is a pleasant term for demolition. How do you intend to control stack implosion and prevent stacks from falling in the wrong direction?
That's a great question. I'm really glad that somebody asked that. So deconstruction isn't really just a pleasant term for demolition. It is really how we approach it. And it's a word that we use not only here, but on other sites to describe the careful and mechanical nature of the strategies that we use in order to take down these facilities. So here in Alexandria, we're obviously in a tight urban condition. There will be no implosions on this site. We will take down that stack in a mechanical fashion along with the other components of the building. We are obviously early. I can't tell you that we don't have a deconstruction subcontractor on board yet, so I can't tell you what the exact means and methods will be here, but we have other projects that we're working on, similarly, like one I'm working on right now in Boston, where we have similar masonry constructed smokestacks, and there we will be building scaffolding all the way around the smokestack from bottom to top, and they will start at the top and start to remove the smokestack, letting it fall inward and go down, keep going down and down and down. And that way the smokestack is brought down in a very careful manner that's fully contained on site. But just to reiterate, there will not be any implosions on the site.
Next question, what is the proposed population and population density for the power plant development, and how does this compare to the surrounding Old Town North area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a little bit in flux depending on how the uses are developed over time. When Carolyn presented, she described how there's some flexibility built into the plan in terms of the percentage of how much is going to be commercial versus how much is going to be residential versus hotel and retail. And so depending on how that actually gets developed over time, there will be a little bit of flux in there. But the CDD Concept 1 plan that we put in envisioned about 2,000 dwelling units here, along with the commercial space.
Great. I think we're flipping to a slide to maybe, show what was submitted in CDD 1. Next question, is the development project being offered any tax incentives by the City of Alexandria?
That has not been discussed.
And a question on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, there's a lot of wildlife along this property. How will this wildlife be preserved? For example, eagles, hawks, foxes, and fishing.
Bonnie, do you want to step in? Bonnie has actually been onboarding a consultant on this front. Do you want to step in and take this one?
Sure. So we're in the process of onboarding a wildlife consultant to first and foremost do a complete assessment of all the wildlife we have on this project. A lot of this wildlife, as we understand, is migratory birds and don't really, their patterns change with season as well as year to year. So yes, this is definitely a very important point to us. Sustainability is a very core principle to HRP, and wildlife is an aspect of that. We are looking into it, and we will, when we have our consultant on board and species identified, we will be able to answer exact relocation strategies we implement.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. We will be looking to sensitively relocate any species here that are here. We'll be relocating them long term.
Melissa, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
I had to call in on my phone. I don't know what happened with my audio device. But thank you, Michelle, for jumping in. I apologize. Thank you for taking those questions. Our next question is related to heights. If I read the plans correctly, they anticipate heights of 14 to 16 stories for buildings on portions of the site. Those seem very high, overwhelming heights in the nearby area. Won't those heights create a visual barrier between much of the surrounding area and the waterfront? Melissa, I think that is a good question to start with you.
Yeah, I think the height. So number one, right now we've only developed the blocks. So just to be clear, the blocks are not going to simply be extruded. Inside each block, there would be a series of buildings and that would vary in height. So some of the heights that are proposed are ranges, and there are up to, and I would say we're probably up to about 14, maybe 15 stories in certain areas. We've tried to think about ways to sensitively locate higher areas to be closer to the substation zone, where the substation really isn't that concerned about its neighbors. We know that Marina Towers is just north of us as well, so we're considering all of that as we develop the site. I would say, however, that this part of Old Town North is quite a bit different than the center of Old Town North or Old Town itself, in that there are existing mid-rise and even almost high-rise buildings around us, and that's all being factored into how we consider the site.
Yeah, I wanted to add, Melissa, I think that's a great point. And I think as part of the Old Town North Small Area Plan, we actually talked about that in particular, so that when we looked at the heights that were contemplated under the plan, they actually looked at being higher as you get towards Marina Towers, but also just as high next to the 10-story office building to your south. And so there are different heights that are surrounding us that are very different than in other parts of Old Town North. And so I think what we are proposing is reflective of those differences. Okay, next question. The PRGS grounds are currently covered in highly invasive kudzu vines that have spilled over onto the National Park Service land. Has HRP contemplated how the kudzu will be removed in a way that doesn't spread it over the development? And so, Simon, I think that one is for you.
Yeah, Mary Catherine, I think we already talked a little bit about this in a previous question, and certainly going to be taking a look at controlling invasives on the property, as well as removing any in coordination with National Park Service.
Yeah, I think that's something to highlight, Simon, that we would need cooperation with the National Park Service in order to do anything on their land. And that's actually one of the things that is part of our discussions with them moving forward. But that's going to take some cooperation on both sides. Next question. What happens to the riverfront RPA with the construction of the Wooner? Is there really an RPA along the river after construction? Melissa, you want to start with that, and maybe we turn it over to Gensler?
Sure. Well, so just to reiterate, the RPA stands for Resource Protection Area. It is a line that is designated based on the distance from the waterfront. So to be clear, the area will still exist. We did, one of the things we did initially when we purchased the property was to go out and survey all of these areas. So we understood exactly where the waterfront line was and where the resource protection area setback was. So within the RPA, you are allowed to build parks and sidewalks and pathways and those sorts of things. The Wooner is itself outside of, meaning landward of the RPA. We do have some small sections of roadway in the CDD Concept 1 plan that and on the northern and southern edges that jut into the RPA just slightly. And that's something that we received a comment on from city staff. And that's something that we've been working through in terms of what are the options to sort of pull that roadway back a little bit and to get it out of the RPA. But to be clear, the resource protection area will continue to exist.
Exactly. Okay, next question. Do you anticipate having a task force meeting regularly with the city and neighboring properties to discuss issues which arise specifically regarding traffic and congestion at Slater's Lane, Abingdon, GW Parkway? Melissa, do you want to try that? And then I'm happy to follow up.
So I'm interpreting that question, since it's talking about traffic and congestion, as being related to movement on the site. So whether that's deconstruction or physical construction. The short answer is yes. We will have an open line of communication with our neighbors. We do that in a variety of ways, meetings like this one, where we can present plans so that people understand upcoming schedules and things like, okay, now we're going to start deconstruction. It's going to last this many months. This is what you can expect to see, and on these timeframes. We will also, when we get to that stage and we have updates to make on a regular basis, we will be hosting a website where people can get information and submit questions, and even a hotline where people could call if they had an emergency question, if they saw something on the site that they needed to report to us right away. So I think the short answer is yes. And as we move forward and there's more actual movement on the site, more work moving towards development, that will become active.
One of the things I just wanted to add to that is what the city normally requires as a standard condition as you get closer to construction is that you will have to have a liaison person identified as part of your development. And so that person's number will be made available to the public for regular communications, and even in cases of emergency. There also are requirements for the developer to meet with the community before any construction begins to talk about, in particular, hauling routes, times of construction, things of that nature. And so that will be part and parcel of the development review process moving forward. Next one is a comment, but I like good comments. Thank you, great answers. Thank you, appreciate that. Next one, when do you anticipate the deconstruction noise to start, and when construction noise end? And I'm wondering if this is a timing question in terms of commencement of construction and how long it will take, or is this a timing during the day of when is construction activity permitted for noise? I think those are two different questions. So with regard to schedule, Melissa, you want to take that?
Yeah, with regard to schedule, we don't anticipate starting deconstruction until probably the latter part of next year. But that is fluid, and certainly before we start deconstruction, there will be plenty of notice to the abutters and to the neighborhood at large. And as I mentioned, we will be hosting informational meetings at that time so that people can be aware of what's happening on the site. And we will talk about things like work hours, and we will talk about, things like how are you going to take down the stacks, and we will talk about things like how many trucks will be coming out of here every day with material, debris, all of those things.
And the city has standard hours of construction, like most jurisdictions do, so that you can't start construction during hours. Normally, I think in the city and during the week, you can't start construction before 7 a.m. And on the weekends, you can't start construction before 9, and there's no construction on Sundays. And so those things are all controlled by the city's regular construction hours and will be part of any future discussion, as you just said, to inform the public of what those hours of construction would be. The next one is specific about the height of blocks A and B. How many stories are on blocks A and B, and is this approved by the city? I think the first answer to that is nothing's approved yet. This is why we're talking with everybody. This is the first concept. And so Melissa, you want to talk about the specific heights on blocks A and B?
Yeah, I think we talked a little earlier about A, and again, these heights were submitted as a range. So A is probably around four stories, given that we anticipate some kind of arts use in that building. On block B, when you consider that you probably have like a retail floor that usually has a higher height, right? A higher ceiling height. That's probably up to a 10 to a 12-story building there. So not that dissimilar from the 1199 building that's next to us or the Muse that's adjacent to us either.
And I was actually going to say that you talked about earlier about being sensitive to the heights around us and that we had actually reduced some heights as part of the Old Town North recommendations. So
That's
Block
right.
A was actually under the small area plan recommended for a height range of 85 to 120 feet because it's immediately adjacent to 1099 North Fairfax. And we've proposed it in the 50 to 65 foot range. And as you said, the Block B is a range of between 120 and 140 in the current proposal. Next question is a timing question. When do you anticipate construction will begin in areas A and B? Melissa?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say we don't know exactly at the moment. Deconstruction, as I mentioned, will probably begin towards the latter part of next year. I expect it will take about 9 to 12 months to take down the power plant that's there. We may be in a position to start construction before the power plant is fully demolished, but as we mentioned, and as the city described earlier, there are still a number of approvals that will have to go through, beginning with an infrastructure plan. After the CDD plan is approved, we'll have to do an infrastructure plan. We have to do a sustainability master plan. And then we also need to do a DSUP plan on the first phases. So that will provide more information on the specific design of the buildings that will be in the first phase. So we'll have to go through all of those review processes before we can actually put a quote unquote shovel in the ground. So I wouldn't expect that we will see anything here until, late 2023 or 2024 in terms of the beginning of construction. And I can't say today on exactly where that will start on the site, but we do think, generally speaking, we would want to start on the southern portion and move northward.
Thanks. Well, we are 7 minutes over 8 o'clock. Maybe Melissa, maybe take one last question and then let's wrap up if that works for you. And I just want to remind everyone, if we didn't get to your question tonight, we are going to be collecting all of these and answering them in written form and placing that information on our website. But again, we'll have further opportunities to engage with the community. And so for the last question, Pepco has been pumping like crazy at the substation and the parking lot for the past 6 months. Any information about what that is? And I didn't know if we had any information about that, Melissa, if you've heard anything.
I'm not sure that I know what that's related to.
And if there's anybody in the city that might know what that might be, has anybody heard anything from Pepco in that regard from the city?
Well, this is Quatran from the city. No, we haven't heard anything along that line, and I'd be in contact with our contact at Pepco to find out tomorrow.
Thanks, Qua. Appreciate that. All right. If we could go to the last slide, Carolyn, on the next steps forward. But we wanted to end tonight showing you how you can continue to engage with HRP and the city in this process in the coming months. We went through the previous meetings, and that pink dot is where we are tonight. We will be having several additional community meetings this fall and through the winter months to discuss specific topics, a number of which we identified tonight, so we can take a deep dive into important aspects of this plan. We'll be sure to provide you with plenty of notice of each meeting and its topics so we can have a fruitful discussion moving forward. At the same time, as Juliana indicated, studies related to environmental remediation will be ongoing. All of this culminates in public hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council in the second quarter of 2022. So we have plenty of time to work together as we transform this unsightly power plant site into a vibrant mixed-use community that weaves into the fabric of Old Town North. Thanks for being with us tonight. And remember, we'll be posting a full list of the questions and answers from this meeting on our project website within about 2 weeks. And we wanted to show you the two websites, both the HRP website, the hrpalx.com, and alexandriava.gov/planning/info. Those are both of the websites where you can find that information. For more information, also, we'll be participating in the Taste of Old Town North tomorrow, as well as the development walking tour of Old Town North. So we will be outdoors and happy to answer more questions then. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.